Hello and welcome everybody to the How We Got Here Genealogy Happy Hour. And my name is Brian Nash, and I want to thank you all for dropping by. If you haven't joined us before, um, right now I'm sort of experimenting with the best times to for everybody. So, if there's a time that's better for you, drop it in the comments, and I will greatly take that in consideration. So often in my genealogy happy hours, I'll concentrate on a specific issue, and today is more of a general thing. I'm going to be answering some questions. These are questions I've had. These are questions I've seen in the genealogy subreddit and on other places. And I'm going to start with one of the most common questions that people are starting out in genealogy. I've seen asked, and I've seen it asked quite a bit recently. So that question is, and I've seen it asked quite a bit recently. That question is, I'm going to talk to my grandmother or grandfather, but it seems to always be most times in the terms of grandmothers, about our family tree. I want to get started. What questions should I be asking? So my recommendation first is you go and you put the information you do know that you know of for sure. So if you have that information, so you're kind of prepared. So obviously you'll know your uncles and your aunts. You'll know your grandfather's name. If you know your great grandparents' names, that's great. Other things would be like, if you knew where your grandparents grew up, so you can kind of be prepared to ask specific questions about those. But in general, really, you want to make it conversational. You want to keep it light. You want to go there, and you really want to sort of let her know what you're doing. But I would approach it with my grandmother. My grandmother just passed away this year. She was 99, and I probably didn't get as much chance as I really wanted to ask her a lot of these things. So this is something that I fought long and hard about. So I would start basically ask what her earliest memory is. Start filling out her life from there. Um, Talk to her about growing up. If she grew up during the Depression or during the war, ask questions. What it was um, like in the community. A good one, if she lived through the Depression, talk about, or any time really, but talk about her Christmases, especially if you're doing it now. This time of year, it's a great place to start. So ask about, what was your favorite, what was the Christmas like when you were growing up? What kind of toys did you get? What did your family do anything special for Christmas? Uh, did you did you was there a special food that was made? If people have listened to my podcast or watched some of my videos, no, I'm a person, I do love food, but food is a great way to connect with people. It connects so many memories. Um, so talk about those things. She brings up food. Say who would make that, and then say, well, so you had to, start asking about her brothers and sisters. Um, if you don't have their names, make sure you get it down. Uh, you often older people, they might not remember dates a lot, but a lot of times they'll remember how old they were. So you had a brother, so granduncle Bill. Well, he was older than you. How much older was he than you, or how much younger was it? If he was younger, do you remember when he came home from the hospital? And then start talking to her about her parents, once you sort of cover that early part of life. So your mom and your dad, your mom, did she ever work outside the house when you were growing up? What did she do? What did your dad do? What what's your favorite memory about your father? What's your favorite memory about your mother? Uh, your mother, you you said her and your father, they met in whatever city or town. Is that where she grew up? Or how did she meet him? Did she ever tell you? Um, oh, okay. So she grew up, and then talk about the town where she grew up, or her mother grew up, or her father. Um, so you're talking down about her parents, and then get into talking about her grandmother, um, and her grandfather. Ask her questions like, do you remember your grandmother and your grandfather? What were they like? Where were they from? A lot of it is really simple questions. Um, do you remember what they did? These things are all important. You're getting this information. You're not asking her for strict dates and stuff. You're trying to get that information because it's going to be helpful when you go looking for records for these people later. For instance, if you're asking about where they worked, what type of job they had, um, you can often then know to look at. For instance, I have family in Cape Breton. There were coal miners. I know that I can go and I can search for pay records. I can search for because of the company store. They have a lot of records that are still available. You can find, which will tell me where they live. I can even find out what their wages were, and I can find out, different things about maybe when they move to a different home, which is really good because when you go back and ask questions later, you can kind of connect those things. Again, when you're talking about her grandparents, they say, how do you remember your grandma? How old were you when she passed away? Where was she living at the time? You want to really just connect on the basic, simple things and start writing it down. In fact, even better, everybody has a phone. Take your phone. It's great. It has great audio. You can record. You can do a video. I recommend doing a video. If you go to Walmart, you can, or someplace, you can buy just a cheap little tripod that you can just put in front of you, and you can be recording, and it can be very unintrusive. You want to make it really natural, and you want to be careful if you know there's family secrets that maybe your family doesn't want to talk about. Try to avoid them. Once they get comfortable, you'll find out they'll tell you some of those stories that maybe you sort of remember hearing, but you never really wanted to ask. Wait for them to get volunteered. You don't want to push it, because there are things that people don't want to talk about, and it's when you're asking questions. Don't push if there's a resistance. If you sense that they're not really wanting to talk about certain things, there could be a reason. But as you go through and you sort of you build that rapport, even though it's your own grandparent, you just want to build that rapport in the conversation, so that they'll get around and talk to you about it. You want to let them know that you're not trying to put them on the spot. You're not trying to get them to give you all the family dirt. A lot of it will come out, like I said, once you get talking. The other thing is, remember, if there's something you're asking and they just don't remember, don't be afraid to say, oh, okay, well, maybe we can talk about that later, and maybe something will jog your memory. And then try to think of things when you're asking that might have jog your memory. Really important thing is, ask, did your parents or grandparents, did they have a family Bible? Do you know where that is right now? And if you can find that answer and you can actually find that family Bible, you will be amazed if it was one that's been passed down from generation to generation. You'll have a lot of your family tree work already done. You want to, like I said, just really be kind of casual. Think about yourself and your different stages in your life, what things you went through. If you're, what was it like? How did you meet Granddad? Where did you meet him? What was he doing when you met him? If they met in high school, talk about that. Ask them what it was. Ask her what dating was like at that time. What did your parents think of him? What did your parents think of him when you first brought him home? What did you think of his parents? What were his parents like? Especially if your grandmother's widowed and you won't have a chance to talk to your grandfather, you want to get as much as you can about his family that you can remember. Which again is, talking about his parents. So when you met, were his grandparents still alive? What were they like? Do you remember their names? Where did they live? You want to kind of just really keep it simple. And make sure you record it. Record it, with a voice recorder, video. Like I said, with cell phones today, your cell phone, if you have it there, it'll be great. You should be able to go and record it and record the audio. You don't need a fancy mic. You can get one if you want, but that might be a little more intimidating. Even if you're recording video, you don't even have to video her necessarily. You might want to go through, because she might not be comfortable at first. So, I'm just tell her you're having the camera focused on you. And then if you need to, bring her in, make it natural, come around and talk to her and turn the camera so it's focusing on you. One of the other things, ask about albums, family albums. Besides the Bible, family albums are great. This here is a picture of my grandmother and her best friend. Like I said, my grandmother died this past year. She was 99. This is her best friend, who's still, as far as I know, she was still living when my grandmother passed away in April. So she would be 99 as well. This is them in 1941. If you're lucky, there's notes on the back. The lights are kind of making this glow. That tells you who and where. You want to be really careful. A lot of those, if it's an album, test at the corner when you're pulling it, because you don't want to ruin the picture. Because often, if they've been in an album a long time, the cellophane, plasticky stuff that they put on it sometimes could pull the image off. So you don't want to do that. So just test it when you pull the picture. When you start pulling on one corner, and just try it first. This is another picture of my grandmother I found. One of the most amazing things that I remember from my grandmother's house growing up, when I would come to visit. When I was young, my great-grandmother, her mother, lived with my grandparents. She died when I was 10 years old, and not quite 10. She died just before I turned 10. My other great-grandmother died just after I turned 9. My grandfather's mother, I guess, not my other, because I have 4 great-grandmothers, but on that side of the family. So I knew her. I knew what she was like. I have memories of what she was like. I hadn't seen her. The last time I saw her was, my grandfather's mother. Last time I saw her was when I was 6, because we'd moved away, and we actually were going back to visit for Christmas, and she died about the month before. but my grandmother's mother was still living at that point. She was in a senior's home. Her sister, is interesting story, was in the next room, and her sister lived for several years later. But her sister and her didn't speak, and all my life, whenever I was younger, I don't remember seeing them ever together. So I know there was something in the family that possibly went there, or just, but it's, one of those secrets I would love them and able to ask. I kind of asked around it certain times, but never given a definitive answer. Yeah, ask for picture albums. Well, like I was saying, my great grandmother, there was a picture on my grandmother's wall, and in one of the bedrooms in her house. And when my mother and I were clearing out her house, not this past summer, the summer before, because my grandmother, she'd gone into a home at age 98. She went into a nursing home. So my mother and I were cleaning out the house, and there was a picture, and it's my great grandmother and her grandmother. And it's an amazing picture because it's probably the oldest relative I actually have a photo of, in the sense that, her grandmother would have been quite old at the time. She was a teen. My great grandmother was a teenager, so her grandmother would have been in her 50s or 60s at least. This picture was taken in the early 1900s, so she would have been born about 1840, maybe earlier. Problem is, I don't know which grandmother it is. I just know that's her grandmother because that's what I was told. I have a feeling which grandmother it is, just based on looking at pictures of other people in the family that on the different sides of the family that I've been able to sort of track down. But I'm not 100% sure. There's no name on the back. Those are great places to start, but there's names, places. Go through the photo album of your grandmother or grandfather, or your great grandmother if you're lucky enough to have a great grandmother that's still alive. Go through it, look at it, talk about the pictures. Look at the pictures. Look what's interesting. You see a picture of an old car, and she said, was this your father's car? Do you remember what time it kind of was? How old were you when you guys got your first car? Especially men, older men, that's a thing that will stick with them a lot of times, is a memory of their first car, or their dad's first car, the first car they drove. That's a good question to ask. When did you learn how to drive? What was the first car you remember driving? How did you get your license? Because that's a really interesting, can be an interesting story. It's not always been the same process we have now. My grandfather and my wife's grandfather, both tell basically the same story. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, when they went to get their license, they drove to a gas station. It's an Irving station. They both described the same place. From what I remember my grandfather telling me, and what she remembers her grandfather telling her. And basically, because they drove there, they were able to get a license. There was no test. It was more just a registration at that point, and never had to take a driver's test anytime in their life. So, those type of things can be interesting. Are they important for genealogy? Yes and no. One thing, it can help you with trying to figure out where records are, but genealogy is more just about the name. Well, to me, it's more than just about the names and the places and filling out the family tree. That's important, so you have that order, but it's about discovering the stories that make your family unique. And you'll find a lot of them on the way by just asking those simple questions, things that are passed down. Even you'll find some of your own memories growing up from your parents. You'll find where sort of they've gotten their ideas from, their values, or could be a favorite, even if something as simple as a favorite food. My grandfather, for instance, I remember him. He made the best baked beans. He made really, really good baked beans. And I was lucky enough to get a recording of my great grandmother, his mother. And one of the things she talks in this recording that I got was how this pot that she had from the time she got married, and so it was at the time of the recording, it was about 60 years later. She still had the same pot, and every night, every Saturday night, actually Saturday, she put her baked beans on it and baked beans for the family. Her husband was a miner. She had lots of kids, so she'd be making beans. It was a relatively reasonably priced product, easy to store. But she was talking about this, and I remember my grandfather really made good beans, and he was really insistent on the way he made it. He had a certain crock pot that he used, not crock pot, but a crockery. And he got that from his mother. I never would have known that. Except for that recording. That's the other thing. When you're talking to your grandparents, ask them things. Were you ever on TV? Were you ever interviewed by the news for anything? Because you'll be surprised what you might find. And if they were, it's very, very possible that the recordings of those are still available somewhere. So you want to get the details of those things. You want to get the details of any weddings that were in the family that they remember. Because those are great sources as well. Because if you can find that, and you have even their, ask them about different cousins maybe that they had, and was there any big weddings you remember? Because often those would be published, especially in smaller towns. They would have maybe even the whole guest list posted in a small newspaper, or they might even, if there's particular people that came from a distance, often these people would be recorded in the newspaper. They would talk to them about, they would have a small article talking about the wedding, and they would say so-and-so came from wherever. So those things are really, questions to ask you might not think. Ask about cousins. And the reason I say, and her uncles and aunts, and the reason I say that is because getting that information, even if you're just trying to build your ancestors back, which is one of the purposes, your cousins, her cousins that are over here on the side, they have the same, eventual ancestor, whether they're first, second cousins. At one point, they would share a common ancestor with her, a common ancestor with you, and they have kids, grandkids themselves, and you never know who might have already done a lot of the research on that line of the family. Can save you time if you are able to make those connections, and be able to find those people who, through a lot of the different websites that you use for genealogy, you'll be able to say, oh, that's actually my third cousin, Jane. I know that. And then you can reach out to Jane through the contact that's on there. Or if you have DNA matches, it helps to try to plug where they are, and what side of the family even they're on. Also, it can help with a lot of, depending on the traditions of different people's groups. Knowing those names of cousins and uncles and aunts can help you with finding family names. Now, Scottish people have a very strong tradition of the way they name people. So by knowing the different names of your cousins and stuff, you can start to pick the names of great grandfathers. You can start to find out what like those are, and when you start searching, even it can help you as you search back farther. You can know that, well, this person is the second born son. The second born son is usually named after the father's father, because I think that's right. I'm just have to remember my conventions, but yeah, it's named after the father's father. Third is named after the mother's father. The first is usually named after the father, and often you'll find that those rules have to get bent a little, because you'll have two people with the same name as you, like your wife's the wife's grandfather might have the same name as the father's father, so they kind of skip things. Or sometimes you'll find they'll use a middle name. So those things that kind of throw, wrench into the gears, so to speak. But it gives you at least a place to start. So what else should you be asking your grandparents? You want to look at pictures, find out who they are, find out who her family are, find out about family traditions, find out what they know about their heritage, because they might say, oh yes, it was actually my grandmother told me about her grandmother who came here from wherever. In fact, asking your grandparents about what they remember about their grandparents. So did your grandmother ever tell you any stories about her growing up and about her parents? If you're doing that, so her grandparent is your second great grandparent, and if she's talking about her parents, you can get that third great grandparent. You can find information about them. They might be able to tell you, oh yes, she said that, because she came from wherever, there were certain things that they did. Because she came here as an immigrant, she had left all her brothers and sisters back in the home country. So you'll know that, okay, that's the ancestor that you're looking at, and then they came here. So you'll know where to look in the home country. You might find names again, because depending if you're looking at the different names that came down from there, you might be able to start finding common names, and know that, hey, her father was most likely named one of these names. So when I'm looking for records over in Scotland and I'm looking for her father, I'm going to start concentrating on these names, because when I'm trying to match up somebody to her, whether it's a baptismal record, I know that chances are, if I find these kind of names, because of the way she named her own children, and her own children were named, you might be able to, pick down that record, and not necessarily say with 100%, but unless you have other corroborating evidence, but you'll be able to say, okay, I found a baptismal certificate, it has her name, it's approximately the time where I think that she should be born based on what my grandmother told me. Also, the other thing is events. Talk to her about events. Look at what were major events beforehand in her life. There's obvious ones that you can think of. Even in Canada, people that lived in the 1960s, they know where they were when JFK was shot, when they first heard about it. My generation, I know where I was when I first heard about the Challenger space shuttle being blown up. There's certain events that might be from communities. If there was a flood during a certain time, you can find out those two type things, what her memories, or your grandfather's memories, if whomever you're talking to, what they remember, or if you're looking even beyond and you know that her parents had lived in this community for years and there was something that happened that did your mother or did your grandmother ever talk to you about this? You're going to find out all kinds of interesting facts. You never know what you might dig up. You never know who you might find in your family tree. And yeah, they're definitely, she lived through World War II. Ask her what she did. If she was a child and growing up, like during World War II, you're going to ask her about, depending on their age, did you notice a difference before, during, and after the war? What type of Christmas gifts did you get? What was your food like? Did you have any relatives that served in the war? Did they live? Did they die? Did they come back? Do you have any stories? Again, you can find all kinds of information, because if they had a brother that had served in the war, and you're able to find their records of service, you might be able to find out information about their parents that maybe she doesn't remember or doesn't know. Or if she had an uncle that served in the First World War, or you might be able to find out some information about her grandparents if she wasn't forthcoming, but because you can find out her uncle, and you can look for his records. But honestly, just go and get the information. Get everything you can. Remember to thank them. Like I said, don't beat a dead horse. If they don't remember, come back to it. Actively listen to what they're talking about, because from listening to what they're talking about, you'll have loads of other questions you can follow up and ask if you're thinking about it. Go in with not necessarily a script of all the questions you want to ask, but with the points you want to touch on. You might want to look at even dividing it into different times of speaking, depending on how much time you have to speak with them. Could depend on their health, could depend on, you're only going to be around your grandparents for weekends because of life getting in the way, but you're traveling, so you want to put that hour or two. And when you go to ask, if you say, Grandma, I'm doing some family research. I want to find in. I want to know about my family. I want to know about you. Would you mind like taking an hour or two? I'm gonna come by Saturday. I'm gonna leave my kids, and my wife. Or my kids and my husband, or whatever. They're gonna stay at my parents. I just want to go and I want to talk to you. I want to learn about you. And they'll appreciate that. She might tell you to bring the kids along, but say they'll come afterwards. My wife will bring them when we're done. They'll come over too, and we'll talk to you. But I just want to spend this time. If you have any albums, pictures, if you know where they are, we can. If you have those, we can look through those. If you know where they are, but you can't get them, I can come get that for you. You want to approach it that you're being helpful, I guess, or let them know that they're being helpful to you. Because grandparents love their grandkids, no matter what their age are. They do want to give. They want to spoil them, and they'll want to share. And everybody likes talking about themselves. So you kind of have the best of both worlds. You get your grandparent talking about themselves. You can get them talking about their family. I would recommend, if you have two grandparents that you're going to talk to, set time aside to talk to them separately, and then talk to them together. And when you talk to them separately, you're going to concentrate more on their life prior to marriage, that side of the family. And then when you get them together, you're going to still talk about that stuff, but you're going to say like, oh, well, Grandpa, um, Grandma mentioned the first time you met her father, um, and then tell the story. Well, what was that like for you? And he might tell you more. He might tell you from his perspective, and you'll say, I never knew that. Um, yeah, you just you you want to do it, and honestly, no matter what questions you ask, if you're finding out information, it's going to help you with your family tree. It's going to help you get to know your family better. It's going to help you appreciate your grandparents and what they had to go through. It's going to make you appreciate your grandparents' parents and some of the things that they had to go through, whether it was they were immigrants, whether they went through the Depression or one of the world wars. You'll be able to kind of connect those events to real people, and that's why I said, if you have the time beforehand, go through and look at things that might have happened in their life, in their parents' life, that even if it happened to when their parents were a child, that they might remember their parents talking about. Because that, even though it's third-hand knowledge, at that point, you're just you're making that connection to the past, and you're going to hear things you probably never heard before. And like I said, it'll give you an appreciation for them. Anyways, so we're going to see if there's any questions. If anybody has any questions, you can drop them in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them. I've been speaking for a long time, so I'm going to slowly shut up and let you guys speak. And if nobody has anything to say, then I'll be kind of going away and saying goodbye. So we're going once, twice. Okay, so let's do this. This is something I like to do here. So it's last call for so now is last call for questions. You go ahead and we will ring the bell. So if there's no questions, I'm going to say goodbye. And I'm going to remind you, keep searching for your ancestors.